there, and welcome to The Metagame, the live streaming show where we not only talk about board games, but also talk about talking about board games. And today I'm joined in the studio here by a special guest, member of my board game group, and dare I say friend, Eric, who is... I think I brought you in because I think that you have some very pertinent stuff to say on the subject of today's episode. So, speaking of which, here's the story. I'm going to start the story of today's episode as soon as we receive word confirmation from the YouTube chat that you guys can see and hear us okay. So as soon as we get that kind of confirmation, boom. Audio and video level is good. Awesome. Okay, so... here's the scoop that led to today's episode. I have in my studio room here across from me, this is also my game room that holds all the games. And across the other side of the room, on that wall, I have the IKEA Calix shelves that go across. And I have nearly the whole wall filled. It's kind of been growing. And I have room for one more column of little shelves. And so right now I'm waiting on my, after Gen Con, I'm going to go and I'm going to pick up that last column of shelves and I'm going to put games in there. And I have a little bit of overflow. You can see, well, Eric can see, I have a little bit of overflow over here. But I have been informed that I need to make the decision that once that last column of shelves goes in place and that wall is full of shelving, once I fill up those remaining little slots of my game shelving, then that's it. That's as big as the collection needs to be, and then I have to go into the mode of anything that comes in. If there's not room for it, something else has to go out. And to be honest, I feel it too. I'm feeling it because I think my board game collection, so it's one wall's worth in a room, if you can kind of imagine that. So, and I kind of feel I'm at the point where, I have games that kind of cover every topic that I would want to play. I have a whole little stack that haven't been played yet or need to be played more often. So there's stuff that's being missed and overlooked. So I feel like I'm at that point where, yeah, for me personally, this is probably enough games for my personal collection. So it made me wonder, that's the topic of today's discussion. One thing I've never outright asked in a Head in the Clouds episode or anything like that is, how big is your board game collection? How many games do you have in there? And what size do you think it needs to be? And why? And we'll get to that a little bit more on my feelings on that in a moment. But I want to talk about Eric, the reason that you're here. Let me scoot over so you can get in a little bit more if need be. I want to talk about the first time that I saw your board game collection.
Yes.
Because you have multiple walls of shelves going on. But when I first came over to your house that first time, I from my understanding, you had games kind of put in like closets and stuff too. And one of those had a water leak.
Yes.
And so you actually had to pull all these games out and like stack them in the middle of your home office, just in the floor, like these big stalagmites and stalactites of board games to weave through in your office. And I remember, I thought it was a beautiful thing.
Yes.
But I remember after that first day, when we were driving home, my wife, on the drive home, she kind of leaned over to me and goes, "How many games does Eric have?" It's like, you don't understand. There was water damage. You had to pull them out.
Yeah.
But tell me about your history with board gaming, how long you've been in it, how your collection has grown, what size it's at, and kind of where you see it going from here.
Well, I have probably what is, if I went to a doctor, I would probably be diagnosed with game acquisition disorder, as we've discussed in the previous. But when I first got into gaming, probably about 10 years ago, I was like rediscovering, not first getting into games because I always played games, but when I discovered games, Euro games, that sort of thing, it was like, oh wow, there's all of these other games that I can, play. And so I kind of went a little bit overboard in discovered BGG,
Okay.
which, as I think that everybody does eventually discovers BGG, and that list of just all the games. And so I started off with the game that really got me heavily into this was Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And so I went, and at the time I think Puerto Rico was #1 on BGG, and it was up there with Agricola and Twilight Struggle. And so the first thing I started to do was I started to, well, of course, get 1 through 100 on the game.
You went through and said, well, those are the top 100. I better get one of each.
Well, Puerto Rico was good, so
Okay.
right. So all of the rest obviously should be good as well. So
Of course.
So I purchased those first, and then once I got to 100, it was like, well, there's another page, 101 through 200, and so on, and then I developed like this thing where, well, like any game that had like more than 25 ratings and it had a 7.0 or above, I kind of figured out those were pretty good games. So I just started collecting those. So, but the idea though, for the most part, was that I just discovered this hobby, and I was actually trying out all of these different kinds of games and kind of discovering, what I liked. But the problem is that with somebody with acquisition disorder, it doesn't stop there. Mm-hmm. And so I kept on, new games kept coming out, and like I'm dreading Gen Con is coming out is in a week or so, and all of the new games that come with that, and then trying to figure out like how is that going to fit within, because I'm already all my games don't fit on my shelves, and so due to that leak, I don't keep things in that large closet anymore. So I still have stalagmites in my
Oh, okay.
in my office. So if you have been there recently, you would see that. Yeah. So now I'm kind of in the middle of that's how my game collection started to grow, and then I slowed down a little bit. Once I realized I got a big collection, but I was still buying new games, and I'm still buying new games, and it wasn't until probably about a year and a half ago that I started to go, you know what, I really need to start culling my collection. And I think all long-term relationships with gamers do end up that conversation of like, I think we're gonna have to start limiting. And your conversation happened a lot sooner than mine. My wife was very understanding up to a certain point, but yeah, it's kind of gotten to that point where, it's well, I think the law of thermodynamics was about entropy. How things that are ordered, basically start to spread out and get in disorder, and it started off in my room. And then it went down the hallway, and then out into the living room, and now I have games all over the house, which I think is the natural order of things. That's my belief, anyways. But my wife is not in agreement.
See, that's really interesting, because I've had kind of this, I've had this kind of personal rule with myself that the games. I've known that that's probably going to be a tendency. So I've had this personal rule that the games are not going to morph and leave out of this room. Now, there is, of course, already one rule being broken. All the thrift store games that I use for thrift stuff, those are in a closet in the other room.
Yeah.
So I'm already.
And that's just the beginning. I mean.
No, don't tell me that.
They have a mind of their own. They do not want to be confined to one room.
It's like pandemic in the real world.
It is. Yeah, it's just a little dot, a little game here, a little game, and then boom! It hits 3, and it just goes to all the rooms, and yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. You mentioned something I wanted to touch on, the timeline, because so timeline-wise, getting to that point of saying, okay, is enough? Is my collection have enough items in it? I started collecting, I think, in 2012 is when I really started to get back into it, early 2012. So 13, 14, 15, 16. I say about 4 to 4.5 years was my point. How does that compare to your timeline of building your collection up and getting to that point from start to finish, or start to that point?
Well, I think you're a little behind me where I was at 4.5 years, but
okay.
But it's a pretty good start. I mean, I've always called your collection cute. I mean, it's a cute little collection. But what do you have, like 400 or 500 games, 400 games?
I'm going to get to that specifically in a minute.
But I mean, I think that everybody's going to be different with the size. What size
Oh yeah.
is important. So I mean, I don't know if we're going to get to this, but I think there's like two different things. There's the one thing is like the general, like how big should a collection be, which I think you could have an argument or I mean a nice civil discussion about. And then there's also personal like your own personal limitations of like house size and budget and those sorts of things. So in general, like I think having a collection like you had mentioned was like having a large collection is having a I think for a gamer it's nice to have a game that whoever comes over you have a game that you can play with them, whether it's a gateway game or if it's people who aren't even going to be able to handle a gateway game, having party games that they'll enjoy playing with. And then if you have your gamer friends over, having maybe something that they don't have that you can play. So it's nice to have a large collection, and I guess the cons of having a large collection are. How many trees you cut down to make the board games. I really have a hard time as a gamer finding cons, but I'm sure there are some to having a large collection.
So
I mean, other than your own personal, you know, limits of like how much room you have versus and what your budget is and whether or not you've been told to.
Oh yeah. So other than those limitations you're currently at, well, what's the environmental impact of what?
Well, I mean, when you think about it, you're supporting an industry. I mean, I've always one of my excuses always is when a new shipment from Kickstarter comes in, is that I'm supporting the board game industry and these publishers and by default supporting people like Chaz, my friend, so it can't be all that bad, right? If there wasn't for people like me, people like you would not exist. I mean, not exist. I mean, you would still exist. You would still exist, but you wouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I mean, I feel like I'm part of the engine, which in itself is a metagame, right? I mean, I am part of the engine of game industry building, which creates the games with the game engines that I enjoy to play with.
I could totally justify it that way.
That's exactly how I justify it.
There we go. Okay. One thing, since I kind of got distracted with the special scenario we have going on here, okay. I haven't mentioned to the chat yet that we'll be going over to the live chat looking for comments. And if you have a statement, question, or comment that you want highlighted on the show, make sure to add the hashtag TMG to that, because I'm going to use my little web browser search tool to highlight the chat comments that have that hashtag in it. And so before we get to the next thing I want to get to is kind of the number of games in the collection, and then also the next part about that is going to be, is that, like you were saying, is that a good or bad thing? Is it wise, unwise, foolish to invest that much in games, and why? But we'll get to that. But first, I'm going to go over to the chat to see what people have been saying so far, and also kind of ask, touching on how long has it been, have you got to the point with your own collection where you feel it has enough games? And if so, how long did it take you to get to that point? So we're going to be catching up in the comments here a little bit. But we have here, we're going to start off this time. Hold on. Okay, as always, we're going to start off with a comment by Kabuki Kid. Kabuki Kid's comment is LOL Trevor. So I don't think that was really anything for the show, but that was always, Kabuki Kids comments are always the first ones, it seems, so I wanted to keep that tradition going. But the first actual comment that has the TMG hashtag in it comes from Nyrus Interactive, who mentions that he just discovered a company called Bitbox, which is a design that allows you to store all your games in smaller boxes. So now your game collection can be smaller, but all this at the same time, it can contain more games. But he mentions, although I do like the original game boxes better. I saw the Kickstarter for this actually a couple days ago. I think it's a Kickstarter that's either about to launch or just recently finished or is going on right now, Bitbox. It's these little kind of gray and black cardboard boxes and things that you can put on your shelves, and it's made to basically, the idea is you gut your games, put them in baggies or whatever, throw away the original boxes, and then just put the baggies and stuff into these so you can be condensing the amount of space they take and condensing games together so that you'll have more games on your shelves, but you'll have kind of just generic shelving. What do you think of that approach?
I think it's great. I mean, when I was first collecting, I didn't want to get rid of any of my boxes. Didn't want I get all the expansions and would have those all stacked above
Oh,
the game boxes. So I'd have Pandemic, and then I'd have Pandemic, all of the other Pandemic expansions, and I would keep all of
you
them.
wouldn't even condense the
No,
expansions
not
into
at
it.
first. No, I wouldn't do that. I didn't even want to pull out the inserts. The crappy, cruddy family show inserts that came with the game, like Fantasy Flights, which are pretty much useless
Oh,
cardboard,
yes, yeah.
bendy things, and the same in every single game.
I hadn't
But
noticed.
yeah, but yeah, that was my first thing to do, was to get over this need to keep all of the expansion boxes, and put them all in there. But like you had mentioned with Machikoro, like not that long ago on one of your shows, about the giant expansion box and a little deck of cards.
Yeah, it's
Um,
ridiculous.
like the Japanese games, which are now, like, we're finally discovering Japanese games, um, uh, and opening up a new market. But they actually, almost all their games are small.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of self-publishing, small publishers, not a lot of money. But I also think that there's no, I think in the United States, especially, there seems to be a need to have giant boxes, because I've even seen in Europe where there'll be the small box version, and then when it comes over to the United States, we have to have these big, huge boxes with hardly anything in them in a lot of
Really?
cases. Well, yeah. Well, I was actually, like, Yokohama, which is going to have the deluxe version from Tasty Minstrel Games.
Hmm.
I just kickstarted, of course, but it's going to be a huge box. And I played with Lorna. Lorna's our local, like, she's the woman that runs our local
Egg.
convention here.
Yeah.
Yeah, which tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Um, she had a copy from Japan, and it's in a much smaller box. I mean, it's not very big, and I'm thinking, why do we have to have all these giant boxes? If we had smaller boxes, we could have more games, because I really think that's one of the problems with board games and wanting to have a large collection, is that are the oversized boxes. I was actually thinking it would be really great if, I mean, this is great that they're doing that, but I was thinking if we shrunk down our games, like, really, really, really small, and then we could just play them with, like, magnifying glasses and tweezers, and imagine all of the space you could save that way.
Okay, this is taking that
No, but
like most conversations I have with you. This has hit the point where it's taken that veer. So we're gonna continue on to the next. But no, what you said, that is interesting
but
though. I wonder if it's a cultural thing, because Japan, you have all these people squeezed onto the islands of Japan, and I know a lot of things in Japan are made to be small as possible and
yeah,
condensed, and that must bleed over to board games. And America, land of the rolling hills and the endless plains, everything is almost like our board game
yeah,
boxes are a manifest,
supersized.
manifest destiny for your shelf.
Yeah.
I'm going to take all the room on this shelf that I deserve. And so I wonder if it's partially cultural.
And selling. I mean, possibly it is. It comes from. I mean, when you think about, like, the mass market games and how huge those were, so that you have this big giant picture as you're walking by. You're fighting for eyeballs. Although,
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder a little bit about if maybe, kind of that fighting for eyeballs. Ideology kind of came from marketing other things and came into board games. So that's why we have these big boxes, even though it's really not necessary, considering that most games, I think, are, gamers would buy small games. They search out games they want. It's not really the same type of market. But I think that's a great idea. Going back to your original, the Bitbox thing or whatever, I think that's a great idea. I also saw another one that they were like, you could put all your games into one of those things. It was not Game Canopy, but there was
A
another
folio,
one. Yeah, folio
yeah,
thing. Yeah,
game folio.
yeah, game
Yeah.
folio. And I thought, wow, that's a really good idea too. At least for some games, you could actually shrink up your if you're willing to get rid of the boxes, or put them in storage, like in your attic or something, that you could really condense down into a much smaller area, which would then allow you to buy more games.
I'm gonna. I see what you're saying. I'm gonna play devil's advocate on that.
Okay.
Though, before we move on to the next
All
thing,
right.
I'm gonna say with the Bitbox, I think I think it's a good idea, and condensing it from a purely psychological standpoint, I don't know if I could do it. It might drive me crazy because part of it. There is something nice about walking in and seeing all the games on the shelf and being able to look through them and the artwork and everything and reminisce. And if you're looking at just gray boxes, as practical as that may be, and not a bad idea, good idea, but I don't know personally if my psyche could do it.
So what you're saying is that you are part of the problem.
I admit it.
No, I mean, I understand that, because that's the way, I was obviously, but I guess the idea would be that you would always have, more, you would just be shrinking up your other games, and then you would have more boxes filling in.
Yeah. Oh,
that
actually, by not doing it, then I'm less of the problem, because by condensing and being room, you're making room for more games, and that's part of the problem. So
well, and then the industry is going to slowly die, and therefore your job.
Okay, so I've created new problems. So there's no, it's just trading one set. All right. Well, now that I'm depressed, let's continue. David Peterson mentions that his opinion is you can never have too many games. I've been collecting designer games for about 2 years now. And
in the honeymoon period.
And they're on the shelves or on tables or in my IKEA bags. I do not need to organize. I do need to organize, though. That's for sure. And I mentioned I'm 4.5 years. I'm sorry. How long did you say you're at?
I'm getting towards 10. I mean,
Okay.
I'm 8, 9, somewhere in there.
Okay, so
lost track.
So you're in your way of thinking, the 2 years point is still the honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
I agree. At the 2 years point, I was still in the acquire as much as I can type of thing. I wasn't as ruthlessly efficient, though, as you were going down the Board Game Geek Top 100. That's
I don't have all the top one, which actually that bothers the OCD part of me, is that I do not have all of the top 100 anymore. Because new ones have moved in, and now I'm like, oh no, I don't even go there anymore because I'm worried that I'm gonna have to buy nations.
Don't do it. Don't give in. Don't. If you're buying nations just for that reason, you've gone too far. Well, get the dice game at least. That can maybe.
I have the dice game.
There's no hope.
but any game that takes 3 or 4 hours, it's hard to get to the table. So that's the only reason I don't have that. But it bothers me because it's like. Because it says owned, and then and wish list.
Maybe you can go down to the game store to their library, and when they're about to throw out the beat up old Game of Nations, say, "Can I just get the box?" And just have the box so that you have the. Okay.
Or I should just switch it to owned, even though I don't own it.
Just lie to yourself.
Just lie to myself.
That's a solution for so many things.
Yes, I do it all the time.
All right. Friend of the show and the industry, Pete Shirey, mentions. He actually talked his wife into looking for a larger house to better store his game collection and give him a basement to convert into a game room. Is that over the top?
Well, a few years ago, I might have argued no. Because I actually was looking at the house next door to us and thinking... I was thinking it's pretty affordable, and it would hold a lot more games.
So wait, you're not talking about not moving there, just having it like a big pod?
No, it would just be a big game storage area.
Like in the cities where they have a sanitation plant and they'll build a house facade over it. They'll just having your game collection.
Sure.
And
Sure. No, it just seemed like just the right thing to do at the time. The game collection was growing, and the house was for sale.
I have a solution.
And it wasn't a large house, but it was larger than the room where it was only I think a 2-bedroom.
Oh, we'll see. Okay.
So I was like, well, that's feasible. It's a 1 extra room. And then I actually, my argument with my wife was that, well, then it will open up a whole another room and then she said, yeah, you'll just fill that up with games once the house is full. And so, yeah, that's where that went.
Oh, that's though. Yeah, only 2 bedrooms. Yeah, I can see now the rationale with that.
Yeah. And think about it, a whole another game room. I could invite people over. Everything would be all set up just for gaming. The whole entire house.
Prepped and ready to
go.
See, now you're starting to make me think.
I know, it's a pretty good idea.
Darn it. Okay, I'm sorry, the comments jumped. And so I lost where I was, but there's three more. So we'll do these three,
Okay.
and then we'll go back to the
right.
discussion portion. Colin mentions, does your collection incorporate newcomers to the top 100? So, and I think you mentioned when you were starting out, you specifically went through the top 100.
Yeah.
Now, do you keep an eye on the top 100? And as new games come out, do you spy and say, oh, I need, you sight unseen almost, when it hits the top 100, does it come on your radar as one that you need to consider getting?
I think that anytime they come on the top 100, it's something to consider. But at this point I am. I think I've gotten past the point of having to have every single game that comes out in the top 100. Well, as I say, it still bothers me when I go and see those blank spots. But like Pandemic Legacy just came out last year, and I purchased that, and it's number one. So I think that, yeah, going through the top 100, but I do think that you look at games that are on there, and some of them, now I know they don't fit my game group, and we'll probably talk about that later. But they don't fit the game groups that I play with. They don't fit necessarily my style of gaming, and because I'm running out of room, I'm starting to reevaluate whether I need to have appease my OCD part of my personality or not.
That makes sense.
But if you're just starting out, go crazy.
I know I've never really paid much attention to the BGG Top 100.
Mm-hmm.
When new games, the way that new games get on my radar to consider is actually I've mostly kept an eye on several different review sites, and I see the games when a review comes on that sounds interesting. I'll that's usually what gets them on my radar. So I kind of take a different. I'm looking through a different lens there on that one.
Well, I don't mean to sound like an old man, but back when I started, there weren't as many review sites. It was like BGG, and then Tom Vassell was just starting to do videos. Scott Nicholson had done some. So as far as video ratings, which I do, watch a lot of those, and start to get kind of an idea based on watching things played and that sort of thing, whether or not I'll like them. A lot of that stuff didn't exist.
Oh, that's true.
Back then.
That is true.
Before the internet. No, it was. 10 years ago,
yeah.
and it really has ramped up now. And I think that people nowadays have a lot more than that top 100 to go off of.
Okay.
I was kind of going off of that because I was like, well, all these people at BGG like these games, they must be good,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I kind of know that that's not, even though they may be good games, they might not be for me. And I think you can, with all of the, people like you and out there reviewing games, you kind of get a better idea of once you know what you like, then you can be a little more selective.
Do you think that the explosion in board game media that's come up within the last 5 to even 2 years has contributed to the number of games that you acquire and the frequency of games that you acquire for your collection?
Interestingly enough, I think that it probably makes me want certain games more, but it probably has allowed me to buy less games. Because I'm able to see, watch. When you're able to watch kind of how something works, you can see the mechanisms, kind of visually see those. I think the videos have really helped me out because I could see how the game works. And just by reading a rule book, I have a hard time knowing for sure because I've read rule books and thought this sounds really stupid, and then enjoyed the game a lot.
Yeah.
And then I've read rule books thinking, oh, that sounds great, and just it's just too much.
Yeah.
And it's and there's something broken in the design or whatever. Yeah. So, but watching the mechanisms work play out, that actually usually gives me a pretty good idea. I was like, no, I don't want that game, or oh, I got to have that game. Like Cry Havoc right now has me salivating because I'm watching the people playing it, and it's getting me all excited about playing that game, and so much more excited than I would have if I was just read about it or saw some sort of ad or even a review on BGG. So, but then other games, I like see that are coming to the con, to Gen Con. I'm like, I've already pretty much written them off because I've seen kind of how they play, and I'm like, yeah, not for me. So, and I think in a lot of ways, it's actually helped me be more selective.
Because coming into it a little bit later, the 4 to 4.5 year mark, I kind of discovered the board game media and rediscovered modern board games, about the time that the momentum really started with all of the online media. To me, it's really what has fueled my acquisitions. All the media that I've been taking, that's what's educated me and got me salivating and everything. And I'm at the point now where it's starting to help me make more discerning decisions. But at first I was like, oh, that looks neat, that looks neat, that looks neat. And it really fueled it.
Well, there are a lot. Even from 10 years ago to now, there are so many more choices. Now, whether or not there are as many good games that are coming out, but let's say 10 years ago, there may have been 100 games coming out, and 10 of them were good. And now we have 500, 800 games coming out, and 10, it may still only be that 10 are really good.
Yeah.
But you might have, actually, there's probably 20, 30, 40, 50 more that are kind of within a range of, actually, that'd probably be pretty fun. And then you have to kind of make a decision of whether or not you need that 20, 30, 40 other games. And I think that's the difference now, too. There are more games.
There are more. Yeah, that's true. There are more. That's a good point. Okay, so let's talk about more. Okay,
right.
So now I want to get into the little bit more of the philosophical meat of the discussion here. Let's talk about how many games are in our collections, and if what led us to think that's enough, and if you think having that many collections is a good thing or bad thing or whatever. And so while we're discussing this in the chat, we don't necessarily need to know how many games are in your collection, because reading off numbers off the chat, while that would be really good television, probably not the most informative thing. This guy had 20 games. But what I want to know is, tell us, what I'm going to return to the chat for, tell us if you think if you think building your board game collection to a certain point is worth doing, and kind of what how that compares to what your priorities should be, and how you determine how big your collection should be. That's the main thing I'm trying to get. How big you determined how your own collection should be. So myself, I'm counting up my rows and columns here and doing some quick math, and I think that my collection is currently around 250 games. I surprised myself the other day. I didn't think it had grown that large. And I know that I personally have a slice of at least a fifth of them are unplayed or underplayed. Unfortunately, I don't have anything still in Shrink. Oh, I have one game in Shrink, Desert Island, because Forbidden Desert. Forbidden Desert is still in Shrink because I'm waiting till my family exhausts Forbidden Island first, and I'm going to introduce that as the next one. But there's nothing else that's still in the Shrink. But okay, I don't want to taint your part. So tell me how many games are in your collection currently?
Somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000.
Really?
Yes.
I had no idea it was that large, because I know you have the shelves going across the multiple walls there.
I'm not sure what it says on BGG, but basically, I kind of, with my Kickstarter acquisition disorder, those started coming in, and I lost a little bit of track at some point, and then I've also started to at our local game store. They have garage sales, and so I've started to sell games, and so I haven't gone on a BGG to remove those either. So I think it says 1,700, I think around there on BGG, but I don't know if it's higher or lower at this point. I know that whatever the peak was, I've actually, I think, started to go down.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I didn't realize that you had that many, so now I'll confess that I'm closer to 317.
All right, I have 4,000. No. Yeah, I have a lot of games.
Okay. So, the question becomes, well, especially if they're not being played, are you just throwing good money after bad? And so this, in my opinion, and of course this is just for me, investing in the board games and stuff is what I do with my disposable income. It's my entertainment.
Yeah.
We don't really go to the movies or a lot of other stuff like that. That's really what I spend my disposable income on. And I remember way back when there was there was this older couple that my wife and I would actually play card games and stuff with on a weekly basis. We'd go and visit with them, and they were kind of mentors in a way when my wife and I were first married. And so we were talking. We were actually talking of all things about lottery tickets, and and it's like, so here's this older, wiser couple, and we were like, the jackpot at that point was up to some record-breaking amount, a few $100 million or something like that. It's like, we were thinking about getting a lottery ticket, but is that just throwing our money away? And is that an unwise investment? And and they surprised me in what they said. They said, if you're paying all the bills and everything's taken care of, and you're on the track that you want to set for yourself, and you have a budget for your own disposable income, it can help you keep your sanity and actually be healthier for you to allow yourself to do whatever you want with that budgeted income that you have. Mm-hmm. Don't feel guilty about spending it on a lottery ticket or a board game or something. As long as if you take the approach that everything else is taken care of and you're not harming yourself, by dipping into your other resources that you need, don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. And if that's what you want to do it. Yeah. And that stuck with me, obviously. And so that's my own personal opinion of, that's why with my board game collection, it's at the point where I'm thinking, okay, it's reached its maximum capacity. I'm going to start culling, not because of any financial burden or anything like that, but that would definitely be a reason to do it if that came into the case. But just because I feel it in my gut. It's like I kind of personally want to fill out this wall, and then I know, okay, that's where I'm at. That's where I need to be. Of course, check in with me next year when that closet and then there's another shelf over here, and I turn myself into a liar. But that's my personal opinion on it. What about your approach?
Well, I mean, you actually have a much more mature way of looking at things. I mean, I've actually come around to that, partially being directed by my significant other, that there must be a budget and that we must stick within that budget, which I didn't know about, like budgets and all those sorts of things. I was, so. Yeah, I actually did have, issues of like, overspending, I think, and I don't think that that's wise. I think it is wise to have a budget and to have, okay, if you're taking care of your bills, your children are eating, mm-hmm. Even if it's just mush, as long as they have, they're not going hungry, and if you have a budget for it, then and you stick within that budget, then I don't think that anybody should have any argument about what you do with that money, other than, like I said, like maybe cutting down trees for board games. Although I think that it's that the board game community is probably a minimal part of the destruction of our forests. So, but other than that, I mean, I think there's a lot of positives to having a large collection. So as long as you're sticking within your budget, but I think that is one of those personal things. It's how large is your budget? How many shelves do you have? How many games? At some point, one of the things actually I was going to say about like some people who are starting out is like you think, there's never too many games, but I've had even you have said, hey, I have a game in my collection, and say, hey, can you bring that to game day? And I can't find it.
Oh, that's a good point.
That is actually one of the problems I've found with having a large collection is finding the game that I'm like, I really haven't played that game in a long time, and I don't know where it is.
And that's really important because that affects me.
Yes, it does. Because that's all that matters.
But yeah, there have been a couple of times where it's been like, let me dig through the pile in this closet and let me see if I can find it. And so that can be I have. Now another thing you touched on it, and that's one thing I was going to mention too, is I want to underscore that the whole approach to how much is too much and budgeting, it's also a completely personal, individual decision. I don't think that there's a one thing of this is the rule, this is how it should be done. It's up to everybody individually and what their priorities and what their prerogative is. Yeah. So not saying this is how it's supposed to be done, and if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. It's nuts.
I've seen the opposite argument on BGG, like that people actually will put out a number like 200 is enough. Like they'll actually say, like in the forum, like 200 is enough or something like that. And I'm like, I'm not even sure where they come up with these arbitrary numbers.
Exactly, yeah.
For how many games, or you can't have more than, if you have more than 100, you have one too many or something like that. I don't know. I mean, I think that everything is when it comes to this is is on a household by household basis,
Yeah.
not if not personal basis.
I completely agree there. And let's see let's see if other people agree with us as much as we think we do.
We
Let's
are
see.
right.
Let's see here. The comments jumped again, so I apologize. Wow, there's a lot of chatting today, but there's not a lot of use of the hashtag today. Here we go. Oh no, the search just wasn't working. Okay, David mentions, and again, I'm sorry that the chat jumped again, so don't know if I'm picking up where I left off. But David mentions, can never have too many games. Oh wait, that's you know what, it did jump because that's one we already read.
Yeah.
Cult of Calix shelves, newcomers. Here we go. Everyone up or down vote games every day for Eric's sake. Oh, there you go. Now you can have ever changing.
Yeah.
The community comes to your rescue. The two house.
Add a tunnel to go between homes. Yes, I have another friend. Jake. Jake had a lot of games. We actually talked about building two houses and then having a tunnel that went underground and then having a game room in between. Underground game room with all of our games, all in that space.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's a serious discussion that you guys actually floated. That's a wonderful thing, and I could see you guys pulling that off. You'd have to have a little guest room so I could come spend long weekends there.
Yes. Oh yeah, we'd have plenty. We have guests.
We'd have a whole second house.
Yep.
Okay, let's see here. Nyrus Interactive mentions, my wife told me that we should do a bed and breakfast focused on board games, so I could potentially have a whole house full of games one day. I will mention that there is a bed and breakfast that my wife and I would go to on the coast. We live about an hour and a half away from the coast here in Oregon. And there's this neat little bed and breakfast. And one thing about this and other bed and breakfasts we've gone to, no televisions. Mm-hmm. And they actually do have, a slew of board games there. They're more big box retailer type games usually. But one thing that's neat is they kind of push, at a bed and breakfast we've been to, they push you towards like playing board games and doing other kind of social quiet activities like that together. So a board game based bread and breakfast, as difficult as that is to pronounce,
bread and bedfast,
that actually is not that far-fetched of an idea, I think.
No, I've actually thought about this, that this would actually be, no. My wife and actually, before I was in the game section, I talked about maybe like at some point, kind of retiring into bed and breakfast type of, situation. And then with this collection that I have, this huge collection, considered, well, this would be great because we've been into to bed and breakfast that have like lots of bookshelves and things, sit here and read a book and, by the fireplace. But I think it'd be great to have bed and breakfast that was, around the United States that we could stop at, go in and in the evening play a board game. I think that would be fantastic. I think, it wouldn't be that hard for a bed and breakfast to have a larger game collection. It'd be smart, but I think having a really large board game collection, I think there would be somewhat of a market for it. But I don't know how many gamers are willing to to spend that extra money on a bed and breakfast that they could buy a game with.
Yeah. Now you could make it into almost a vacation type thing where you could create like a chain of them that kind of work together, and you could have this almost and have like a package deal. So have this nomadic tribe of gamers that for vacation kind of travel, going from one to the other as a big package where they're all kind of.
Well, I did see that there was that one lodge that was actually that had that in Colorado. There's that castle, but then there was also very recently in Colorado they had a kind of a convention that was a family game vacation.
Oh, really?
And the people went there, and I can't remember. There was some people in the media that were there, but they actually Dan King was there, and they went there to play games, but also go, I think, skiing and and do stuff in the mountains, and so that's a really cool idea too, because that's kind of a hybrid of the two ideas. Going there with your family and having stuff to do with your family other than just gaming, but then then also having the 24/7 gaming going on.
That would be really nice. Okay. Kabuki Kid mentions a good question here I saw out of the corner of my eye. What about never wanting to cull any games from your collection because of nostalgia reasons, even if you will likely never play them anymore, such as Monopoly as an example? They chew up space too. That's a really good question. I have, I will admit, I have a problem with the type of nostalgia. That's the one thing that's kept a lot of games in my collection is this draw of nostalgia. Quick story: when I was like in 3rd through 6th grade, I drew all of these comic books, just on notebook paper and stuff. But I had all these comic books I made about this little superhero and his adventures. And that's what I would do. My family would be watching TV, and I'd be over on the side of the room at a little coffee table, drawing all these comic books with all my markers. And I must have had a collection of like 16 to 20 of them by the time I was like in 6th grade or something. So one day, I stopped drawing them for a while, and so a couple years later, stupid middle school kid. Okay. I'm cleaning my room. The poison is taking effect, Eric.
It
worked. So one day, stupid middle school kid, I'm cleaning my room, and I open up this drawer, and I pick up all of these comic books I've drawn since I was in 3rd grade, and I'm cleaning my room, and I go, don't need these anymore. I take them out to our burn barrel we had in the backyard, throw them in, and as I'm throwing them in and watching them go up in flames, I'm thinking, what did I just do? And I've regretted. That's one of the major things I regret in my life. But it also then something that day changed where I became a lot more clingy to stuff that might potentially be nostalgic. So because of that, I think that's a direct reason why I have trouble letting go of a lot of board games that I might not even play anymore, but maybe I enjoyed them or I enjoyed the artwork. I find it really difficult to call because of that reason.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, well, it's a little bit different to throw away your artwork, original artwork, than it is a game that you can probably reacquire. You know, you'll never be able to reacquire all of that artwork. I mean, I would be devastated. I don't know how I could live with myself. But
You are trying to off me.
no, I have. I mean, you hear about gamers that they actually will cull a game and then they will reacquire it, and then they will cull it again and then reacquire it again. I mean, that I think a lot of that has to do with nostalgia. It's like they must you buy the game because you remember, oh, you know, that game really was really good. I remember enjoying and having these. I mean, because a lot of it is great experiences that you have. Probably the reason why you call the game is maybe it's actually not that good of a game, but it's the experiences that you have that are attached to that game, like, you know, the ghosts of these games that are retained. Because I know that I've played some games and thought, wow, that was just great, and then I'll play with a different group, and I'm like, this is really not a very good game.
Oh yeah,
and I think it's it's those experiences, and you don't want to necessarily get rid of a game sometimes, even if it's not very good, if it's something you've had a great experience with.
You know what? I'm looking right there. I think a prime example of that is XCOM. I have had really. I remember we played XCOM at an egg, and it wasn't the best experience with everyone there. But I played with another group, and it didn't go over at all. And so the best response I've gotten to XCOM has been mediocre. I still think there's a good game in there, and I want to play it again to try and hit that sweet spot with it, but it's just not gone over well. But it's an example of a game that I probably won't be able to easily get rid of because of that. Well, there's potential here, and you know, there was some experiences that were okay, and remembering the ghosts of the games that were played. But I think that type of game is a really good example of that.
Well, and that game has things attached to it, like when you played XCOM, the video game, or the fact that it is one of the games that has utilized the the tablet, utilized digital devices. So it has some other things attached to it that make you like, wow, that's one of the only games that does that.
That is true.
I think but then there's a game like Alchemist that probably is probably a better game that utilizes the digital technology. I mean, I think XCOM's a good game, but I have yet to have a fantastic experience with it. But I know some people who have, so I think a lot of times it has to do with the experience that you've had with the game, and that may have something to do with the group that you're playing with, or in some cases it may just be that particular day it just didn't work.
That is true. It can be subjective.
But yeah, I think nostalgia. But I think you do have to get over that. I mean, I have like the games that I raised my kids on, like Hiss.
Oh,
Hiss. I'm never gonna play Hiss again. Unless it's with my grandchildren, which of course that's always the excuse to keep like the kids' games. It's like, but if I get rid of this when I have grandchildren, it's like it will be hard to find a game of Hiss. But the games that we'll never play with. But I remember shooting around in the Black Pirates, the Hubba game with the little squeezy things trying to shoot the ships across the ocean and stuff. And so I have those memories that are with my children, and it's hard to get rid of those games because of that. So I mean I don't know. It's that's a toughie. I mean I think that's just one that you have to just sort of like the box thing. Getting rid of the boxes. It's just something you have to decide when your game gets to a certain size. If you want to buy more games, that you just have to let it go.
that's
Just
true.
push it and let it go. Say, bye.
I can't do it.
Take a photo.
Put the photos on your note.
You could just have a photo album. Oh, I remember that game.
Look at those components. A
Yeah.
close up of the components. Let's move on before I say something I'm going to regret.
Okay.
David mentions a good question here. So, does your game collection need to have all your favorite games, or is it good enough if someone in your playgroup has it? I know they answered that one for me. I have already more than once within the last year and a half actually contacted you first to ask whether you realize it or not. I've figured out from you to find out if you have a certain game, and if you do, sometimes that's prevented me from having to go out and get it.
Okay. Well, I mean that's good, but if the game, I mean, like your favorite games,
Your favorite.
that's the problem. I mean, because I know that like Las Vegas, I had that game, and it turned out to be one of your favorite games.
And I went out and I snapped, and I had to go to a European website somewhere.
At the time,
it
it
was
was not easy to find.
Yeah, you're right. I scooped that up.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I mean, if it's your favorite games, I mean that's the problem is if you have another game group over and it's a game group that doesn't have that game, and you love to play that game or it's perfect for that group, it's a real bummer to not have it. And I know I'm not helping people who are trying to maybe like not have as large collections as I do, but I mean I've found I was like, oh, Chuck has Hyperborea and I don't. I really want to play that right now because that's one of the only games you have that I haven't bought because you have it. But there's that possibility that if it's a game you really really like, but if you're playing with the same group all the time, then I think you can spread it out. But sometimes sometimes your game group doesn't meet for long periods of time because the game group leader is going to all the conventions all summer.
Let's move on to the next. Let's move on to the next question here. Chuck in the comments here mentions that I find building my collection to be a very rewarding hobby, given all the things I could be wasting my money on. I have games for just about every situation, be it family get-togethers or friends, and I think that goes back to what we were discussing about what you choose to spend your disposable income on. Actually, we're about 6 minutes or so. So let's enter the lightning round. Let's see how many of these we can get to. Kabuki mentions again, I somewhat doubt my want list will ever truly be empty. The thrill of the hunt is part of the joy.
Oh, yes, definitely. You should always have a Grail game. It makes life just that much sweeter.
So even if you obtain your current one, coming up with a new one?
But you got to find a new one.
Oh, okay. Dark Rebel 000, or maybe it's Dark Rebby 1000, I'm not sure. But whoever you are mentions the collection of around 90 to 100 games. So they sort out games every year that haven't been played in the last 2 years. Oh, that's a good one. They sort out games that haven't been played in the last 2 years and add a game whenever it feels like it adds a completely new mechanism or a different genre. I know that a couple years ago, Rodney Smith of Watch It Played did this big thing where he listed all his games, and if he did not play that game that year, at the end of the year, he got rid of it. So he did the whole, if I'm not playing this, I'm getting rid of it. If now I don't even want to ask if you did that with your collection, how many games you would be getting rid of.
It'd be sad.
Yeah, and So I kind of admire people that can do that kind of, if I'm not playing it, culling it. But again, going back to the damage caused by throwing away those old comic books, I've decided for myself that I'm not going to arbitrarily set deadlines for getting rid of games.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that's like the clothes. Like if you haven't worn a certain piece of clothing, you get rid of it. That's kind of like taking from that.
Mm-hmm.
You know that thing. If you haven't worn that clothes in a year or two, get rid of it so you make room in your closet. But games, I mean, it's different because like a situation could change where your gaming group changes, and now all of a sudden that group of games that you were about ready to get rid of now all of a sudden become important again because the gaming group you found a gaming group that actually likes to play those games.
That's true.
Like maybe heavy Euros. It's like, well, the gaming group that we have doesn't really play heavy Euros,
Yeah.
but then you go to Egg
And then that's where the
almost all
focus.
heavy
Yeah,
Euros.
yeah.
And but so you could actually like your one gaming group, you may just decide, oh, I'm going to get rid of all these games. I haven't played them in a year, and then all of a sudden, boom,
There's an event that
there's
comes
an
up.
event that comes up, or a few people are looking for a game group to play with that plays heavy Euros, and if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have them, oh well.
That's true. Oh, here's one. Oh, Pete mentions too, speaking about limits, I originally set my limit to 250, but now it's sitting at about 650, which is why I need a bigger house. Logical.
Yep.
But I feel the right number for me is 500. I'll probably trade or sell off the overflow. That's good. The only question I'm left with about that is how Pete came to that number of 500. I mean, sounds like it's just his gut feeling, which is probably about as arbitrary as my gut feeling of when I fill this wall, I'm full.
It probably has to do with space, I'm guessing. I will say that if anybody doesn't, I mentioned it earlier, but if anybody doesn't have, if you have a friendly neighborhood game store near you, if you can talk them into it, if they don't already do it, I found garage sales to be great thing to do. They have a garage sale at ours. I bring a ton of games, put low prices on them. They sell, and then I get credit. And now I just, basically I'm replacing for every 10 games, I probably get one game out of it. But I'm fine with that because usually they're games I don't play anymore.
Yeah, that's actually well, that's one thing I wanted to mention. The board game garage sale at the friendly local game store, they give you store credit. Is it
Hmm.
equal to whatever you sell the game for?
Yeah, it's what I sell the game for is what the credit I get.
That's an
So they
excellent.
actually are doing it for nothing other than the fact that because it's store credit, I am buying the games there at their inflated friendly neighborhood game store prices. But I mean, I'm fine with that,
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
the fact that they are doing this for free actually allows me. I mean, I'm fine with paying a little bit more for the games that
You
I
don't
do get.
you don't have to pay a little bit extra for a table space at the garage sale or anything like
Nope.
that.
No.
That's a sweet
Yeah,
deal.
they're really that's a really good deal. So if you can talk your local game store into doing that, I think it's great. I think it's great for them too. You tell them that hey, if you do that, then I'll be in here with my credit, buying games, and when I run out of credit, I'll probably still be buying games. So
Okay, so let's take one more. Let's wrap up with 20-sided turtle. Always a pleasure to see you. Who mentions once I got to about 300 games, I felt like my collection is relatively complete. I have at least one of most types of games, and new games will come out that I want, sure, but I don't feel like I need to collect anymore. Did That's a good question to end on. Do you ever feel with your acquisition of board games, do you ever feel like you were collecting for the sake of creating a collection?
well, I think early on, there probably was a certain amount of that. Part of it was that I like to have a library, which I think is a collection. I mean, it's not a like, oh, I'm building something like a glass menagerie that I can look at. It was more along the lines of I like to have a library of games to play. I don't think that it's not that anymore. And also, as a collector in general, having a disorder as I do, I don't think that board games are a great thing to collect if you're speculating. It's not a great speculative collector's item. So, especially since it is so large, like we talked about, it takes up so much room. Whereas if you got like a comic collector and you buy 10 issues of number one issues, it's it's still only like that thick, issue number ones, and and I think with comic books, occasionally like you can actually make some money on things like Walking Dead has kept me in the money for the last couple of years. I've been selling off early issues of Walking Dead in order to support my game acquisition habit. But games, I mean, for every scythe, like I was telling you earlier before we started the show, I bought 3 copies and actually made money off of Scythe. For every Scythe, there's a Ghostbusters. There's a game that if you bought 3 or 4 copies, you'd still have them. I think for me, what was the question again?
Did you ever, in collecting games, collect them just to have a collection, to be collector?
Yeah, I did at the one time, but I do think as far as new games are coming out, though, that there's an evolution of gaming that's occurring right now, where games like that just won Spiel des Jahres, that Isle of Skye kind of took Carcassonne and turned it around, added some more mechanisms to it and bidding and aspects, and made it into a totally new type of game. So it's a tile-laying game, but and to me is a lot more interesting and more fun. And actually, as I've evolved as a gamer, I would rather play Isle of Skye than Carcassonne. I don't know that I would get rid of Carcassonne. It's a great gateway game, but Isle of Skye is in my collection, and it's a new kind of a hybrid, thing of mechanisms. So even though there might not be new mechanisms coming out every year, like say deck building, I think that there are new combinations coming out every year, and this evolving game industry, and the designers are coming out with really like the combination that was in Blood Rage, of Eurogame and Ameritrash, kind of get those hybrids that are happening right now that are really exciting. So I never, maybe it's a problem, maybe I still have a problem, but I just think that there's so much new coming out that is actually good, that I don't feel like my collection is done. I feel like it'll be an ever evolving collection from now on.
Well, that's a whole other topic discussion there. The evolving tastes, changing the games you're into. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail because we're pretty much out of time. But I will mention the whole collecting for the sake of being a collector and creating a collection. That's never been something that has influenced my purchasing decisions. Every game I have has always been because I think, I'd like to play this, or I'd like to share this with this person I know. And it's always been what drives my acquisitions. It's never been, I'd like to have a tile building game. I'd like to have this for my library. It's never been that. It's always been that gut, I know who I'd share this with type of thing. So, speaking of sharing things, I'm glad that Eric took the time to come and share his time with us. Little Easter egg thing. I think around Head in the Clouds episode number 80, the one where I first talk about 2 mil versus 4 mil little baggies. I have a person in my game group who I talk about how I sometimes borrow stuff from his game collection, and the bag says property of Eric, the box full of little baggies. This is the Eric that references. So
I want those back.
I'll add them to the pile of your stuff I need to have it find its way back to you. But so thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me.
This was a lot of fun. And thank you all for sharing your time in the chat. And until our next episode of the Metagame, here I won't put the logos up over your... Oh, it's my face. Okay, I'll sacrifice my own face. For more board game news and reviews and commentary, be sure to check out the Dice Tower over my left eye and the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channel over my right eye. And follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well to continue the conversation. There we go. All right, until the next time, I've been Chaz Marler, joined by Eric from my game group, and along with the YouTube chat, we have been playing the Metagame. Thanks, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching the Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.